My name is Adam Nathanson, President CEO of Mapleton Communications, and we are sitting in our boardroom. We are a mid-sized radio operator with a focus in the western region of the United States. So we own and operate 26 stations, mostly in California and Oregon, and we are acquiring another 10 radio stations in Chico and Redding, which are pending FCC approval. So we will be up to 35 radio stations, but mostly with the focus on mid-sized markets. And what I mean by mid-sized markets, I mean markets like San Luis Obispo, Chico, Redding. We're in Medford. We're in the Central Valley of California, in Merced, California, and Tulare, Visalia, Hanford, California. Our FMs are mostly music stations. Our AMs are mostly news talk stations. On the FM side, format-wise, we have everything from country to classical to alternative to active rock to regional Mexican. And it really depends on the market. So we really focus our programming efforts on the markets that we serve. First, I would hire an attorney that is a FCC attorney, and there's many of them in Washington. We use a company called Dow Lonis as our FCC counsel. There's Latham and Watkins. There's Fleischman and Walsh. But clearly you need FCC counsel. And then there's several forms that the FCC requires in terms of applications for approval that you have to file. And it's a government-regulated business. The radio station frequencies are government-regulated. So there's only an allocated amount of stations and frequencies in a given market. And your signal contours are also somewhat regulated. That's why you don't have one station in LA getting all the way up to San Francisco, because in between there's mid-sized markets, and we have our own signals with our own contours that are kind of regulated by the government. AM and FM stations are all regulated by the government, and the contours, which means really the signal pattern and power, are really mandated by the FCC. And that the reason for that is if you have a signal in Bakersfield, California, which is pretty much flat terrain, there's no mountains around, and then about 40 miles north of that you might have Tulare, Visalia, Hanford, where we're an operator in. If the contour wasn't regulated, that signal in Bakersfield would get into our market. And so they want the signals to really serve the community of license. I mean, that's really the way that the FCC, or at least my interpretation of the FCC is. So all your FM frequencies and AM frequencies have a city of license that they have to serve with their coverage. The FCC does limit the power and bleed in from another market, or else you would have a lot of interference, which on some stations you do, depending on power. An interesting situation on which might surprise the audience here is we have an AM stick in San Francisco, and we have a daytime power, and we also have a nighttime power. So AMs are actually regulated day power and night power. And it's called kilowatts. So we have a 5,000 kilowatt station daytime power, but we are regulated at night where we have to reduce power. And the reason is there's a station on the same frequency, 1510, in Spokane, Washington. That's a 50,000 watt nighttime signal. So believe it or not, we in San Francisco reduce power because of a station in San Francisco on the same frequency. So that just shows you how far these signals can really travel if not regulated. And so that's the reason we have to reduce power. Are there fees that a radio broadcaster pays to the FCC? The answer is yes. There's license fees, and there's also a lot of other requirements that the FCC requires of a broadcaster. We have to comply with EEO requirements, which is when we recruit employees, we have to post the position out to the public so that there's no discrimination. We have to keep a public file of any, which basically has our broadcast license, our frequency, many other things in the broadcast file. Letters of complaint from the public, which is open to the public. So there are certain things that we have to do with the FCC in terms of the public files. And then we also have to make sure we're in compliance in terms of, like I said, from a signal standpoint, but there's also radiation and other issues as well involved. So there's a lot involved in being a broadcaster besides just playing the music and sales. There are, the government requires that you really have a fiduciary responsibility. Most importantly, the government really wants you to be a service to the community in case there is a disaster in the community. And so that's one of our primary responsibilities as a broadcaster, is in the event of an emergency that we're able to basically inform the community of what to do. And so there's EAS alert and tests that are required that you have to conduct as being a broadcaster. So that's kind of a little bit behind the curtain of on the FCC with radio. How has radio evolved since inception, and a little bit of the historical? Well, I guess I'll give you my my own interpretation as much as I can. The first radio signal, I believe, was in 1917, broadcast in Pittsburgh, which was KDKA. And so that was the first radio station, but you should verify that on the internet, which I'm sure you can. And radio has since evolved with the AM frequencies to FM, which clearly provide better quality sound in terms of music. FM stands for frequency modulation. And I would say that radio has really evolved from in the early days where I guess boxing, the Jack Dempsey fights, baseball, where people would gather in the living rooms around a radio, and it was the primary medium. Then television came around, and everyone said that radio was going to kind of die and fade out, and radio has remained steadfast. And then you've got obviously satellite radio as of recently, and you've got the internet and the iPod, but radio is still a viable medium. I don't think it's going anywhere. Clearly, we believe in the business, and it really is a terrific medium to, I think, support your advertisers and your customer base in that market. So radio has become interactive. The technology of it all really hasn't really changed that much. That's the amazing part. You still have a transmitter. You still have your antenna. Although technology is evolving with HD radio and other things, but from the bare bones of it all, radio clearly has gone digital in some capacities, but your bare bone cost of operating a radio station and the CapEx costs involved in a radio station really hasn't changed that much. How much does a radio station in Los Angeles cost? That might surprise people. How much does an FM stick cost? Because a lot of people say, well, I want to buy that radio station and I'm going to program it and I'm going to make it better. It might surprise people, but in a major